The first flash wasn't from the tunnel's lights or the advertisement screen sliding by the train windows. It was from a phone camera aimed straight at his face. The lens blinked, the shutter sound popped like a smirk, and laughter burst in a tight, sharp spray that stung more than the winter air seeping through the carriage doors. James Johnson flinched before he could stop himself. He told his body to be still, to be stone, but the instinct had fired. Chin pulled back, shoulders angled, palms tightening around the leather strap of his satchel. He was a tall man, broad through the chest and shoulders, a presence that made space whether he asked for it or not. In a navy overcoat flecked with tiny crystals of melting frost, a maroon scarf tucked at the throat, he looked more like a diplomat than a teacher riding the morning line through Beijing. His students would be setting up the projector by now, arguing over today's reading, planning which questions to pounce on when he walked in. The thought steadied him for a second, then another flash went off. Someone muttered, just loud enough to be overheard, "Don't stand so close." Another voice, "Watch your bag." A teenage voice, restless and too loud, carried a word he had learned to recognize even when he didn't want to, an old slur that tasted of rust and ignorance. The syllables hung in the air like smoke and settled on his skin as if they could stain it darker. James forced a slow breath. The train rocked, its wheels singing along the rails, and the bodies around him swayed in practiced rhythm. The overhead lights were too bright, making every reflective surface a mirror. Steel poles, the curve of a window, the gloss on a poster for an English cram school. His own reflection floated in glass, a 6'3" black man with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that looked more tired than he felt. "Don't react," he told himself. "You have a lecture first period. You promised Min you'd bring the sample texts. You promised yourself you'd keep choosing patience." A child watched him from behind a puffed pink coat, eyes wide and curious. The girl's mother tugged her closer, whispering something that turned the girl's gaze from curiosity to caution. The shift, small as a heartbeat, hurt more than the laughter. He smiled at the child anyway. The child did not smile back. The doors slid open at Yonghagong Lama Temple Station, and a draft of cold air rushed in with the smell of snow and stale cigarette smoke. A man shoved past James with a shoulder and did not apologize. Another passenger's elbow jabbed his ribs, and the man lifted both hands theatrically, as if the mere contact had threatened him. "Careful," the man said to the air, to the crowd, to anyone who might witness the performance. "Some people don't know manners." Manners. James tasted the word like a challenge. He had left Chicago years ago to teach linguistics overseas. He spoke Mandarin with a professor's care and a Midwesterner's patience. And he could talk for an hour about how tonal contour shapes Chinese politeness strategies. He could parse honorifics. He could draw the map between respect and rhythm. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, the train felt like a stage where he'd been cast without consent as the villain or the fool, and the audience wanted him to forget his lines and trip. He steadied his breath and found the anchor of routine. Thumb the satchel, textbook, notes, attendance sheet, a spare marker. He pictured his students, their earnest questions and arguments about meaning, their willingness to stay after class and ask about slang he still didn't know. He pictured Min herself, sharp, soft-spoken, the kind of student who wrote emails that read like tiny essays, the one who sometimes stayed behind to say that his class made the week feel survivable. Focus on that. Focus on the promise of a room where words were used to understand, not to wound. An ad above the door depicted smooth hands pouring tea into porcelain cups, steam coiling like a silk ribbon. The caption promised harmony. The irony tasted bitter. The phone camera flashed again. "Say something," the boy holding it said in halting English. His friend laughed. "Speak English! Rap for us!" The words were bait. The boy's eyes glittered with anticipation, with the expectation that James would perform. "Put the camera away," James said in Mandarin, calm, clear. "This is a public train." Maybe it was the Mandarin itself that annoyed them. The boy's mouth curled. "Wow," he said in Chinese, sing-song and mocking. "Look at that. The big foreigner can talk." He pronounced the last word with a sneer, like a bad taste, and a few people chuckled. Others pretended not to hear. An older woman, face soft with fatigue, glanced at James with an apology she didn't know how to deliver, then dropped her eyes. The train jolted. James rocked on his heels and planted his feet wider, a habit from years of tallness in tight places. He checked the time. 8:30. If the line kept on schedule, he'd be at the university gate by 9. He rehearsed the first minutes of his lecture in his head. Greeting, quick check-in, an anecdote about how one syllable can turn a compliment into an insult. His mouth almost quirked at the irony of that. Then the train slowed again, screeching into the next station, and the doors slid open, and a man with a thermos stepped in. The man found himself face to chest with James. He looked up, startled. Then exaggerated disgust. "Move," he snapped, and before James could shift, the man tipped the thermos to avoid him. A bead of tea jumped the rim, splashed on James's coat sleeve, and slid down like a stain of accusation. The man made a show of wiping the mouth of the thermos as if contact with James had dirtied it. "Dirty," he muttered, not quite under his breath. The word struck with the precision of a slap. James lifted his wrist to blot the tea with his scarf and stopped himself. No, not the scarf. You'll carry the smell into class. And then the moment had passed. The man had already turned away. The boy with the phone was whispering again. Laughter rippled. James focused on the rhythm of his heart. He counted silently to 10. He tried to replace the sting with the memory of his first class in Beijing, the day he asked students to bring a story from their family about names. He remembered a shy boy who whispered that his grandmother had chosen his character to mean quiet pine, and how the boy smiled when James wrote a stanza from a Tang poem on the board to honor it. That had been a good day. He tried to breathe himself back to that steadiness. He tried and failed, because a voice punched through the carriage with the cold weight of authority. "You," it said. "Passport." 2 railway police were stepping through the gap between passengers, their uniforms neat, their expressions ironed flat. The taller one had a clipboard and a pen held like a weapon. The shorter one had eyes that flicked quick and landed hard. James felt the first rush of adrenaline, the sensation like a film quickening, as if the frame rate had changed. He slid a hand toward his satchel. "I have it," he said in Mandarin. "Show it." He did. The tall officer plucked the passport and residence permit from his hand without thanks, as if taking an object from a shelf. The officer's thumb dragged along the page, leaving a faint, damp trail. He held the booklet up to the carriage light, then down again. The shorter officer studied James's face as if searching for mischief in the pores, for criminality written in freckles. "What are you doing here?" the tall one asked. "I am a professor at the university," James said. "I'm on my way to teach." The tall officer made a small sound that could have been disbelief or boredom. "Teach what?" "Linguistics." The short officer barked a laugh he didn't bother to share. "English, you mean?" "Linguistics," James repeated. "I teach in Mandarin and in English." The short officer's eyebrows rose as if the word itself were an insult. He leaned forward until James could smell the mint on his breath. "You think we can't tell when people lie?" A young man behind James snickered. A woman near the door shook her head. The boy with the phone raised it higher, hungry for a better angle. James felt dozens of eyes clicking into focus. Each gaze a shutter snapping a picture that would be saved as proof of a story they wanted to tell about him. Big, dark, dangerous, lying. The tall officer scribbled something on his clipboard. "Bag," he said. "Open it." "It's books," James said. "Class notes. I'll open it if you need me to, but please, not here. I'd prefer to do this privately." He hated how careful his voice sounded, how diplomatic, how small. "Open it," the officer repeated, louder. The words struck like metal on metal. The carriage hushed itself to listen. James swallowed and slid the satchel around. He hesitated, fingers on the buckle. He could feel the crowd leaning toward him, palpable even without sight. He forced the buckle loose and lifted the flap. Paper, pens, textbook, apple, the plastic sleeve with the sample texts Min had asked for. The officer reached and pawed through, not roughly, but with a clinical disrespect that felt worse. He lifted the apple, examined it like contraband, and set it back with a wet thumbprint. "Stand up straight," the short officer said. "Hands where I can see them." "They can see," James said, and set the bag down. He laced his fingers lightly over the satchel. Not quite a pose, not quite surrender. The short officer took a half-step closer, closing intimate space with a smirk, as if he enjoyed the flinch he didn't get. An old man in a knit cap spoke from near the door, voice tentative. "Officer, the train is crowded. Maybe let him—" "Mind your own business," the tall officer snapped, not looking. The old man pressed his lips together and stared at his shoes. The train slid into the next station. The doors opened. Cold air poured in. No one moved to get off. The scene had turned into theater, and tickets had been paid on entry. The short officer lifted James's passport again, made a noise of disgust at the photo as if the face in it had offended him by existing, and flipped to the visa page. "Why is your last name Johnson?" he asked suddenly, as if this were the puzzle piece that proved a wrong picture. James blinked. "Because that is my family name." "Not African?" The officer waggled the passport like a joke. "You say you are American, but you look—" He let the sentence dangle, derision filling the space. Heat crawled up James's neck. "I am African-American," he said. "I was born in the United States. I teach here under contract." The tall officer made a show of scratching his pen across the clipboard. "Where do you live?" "Chaoyang." "With whom?" "Alone." "Why alone?" "Because I am an adult," James said before he could stop himself. The retort wasn't sharp, but it was sharper than he'd planned. The short officer's eyes flashed. He stepped in and struck James's shoulder with the flat of his palm. It wasn't a punch, but it pushed. "Watch your tone," he said. The push sent James back a half-inch into someone's backpack. The person jerked forward with an exaggerated, "Hey!" as if he'd been shoved by a criminal. "Don't touch me," the man said loudly. "Keep him away from me." Several people tittered. A woman laughed outright. The sound bright as broken glass. James shut his eyes for a heartbeat. Humiliation spread like a bruise. He opened his eyes and saw his reflection again in the window, ghosted over the dark tunnel. He thought of his mother's voice in Chicago, the way she used to say, "Baby, when they try to make you small, stand up taller." He straightened. "Officer," he said quietly, "you have my documents. They are valid." "Maybe they're fake." The short officer said it with relish, like a countertop detective who had found the twist that would redeem his morning. "Maybe you're teaching without permission. Maybe you're not a teacher at all." And here came the chorus from the crowd, the murmurs swelling like a tide. "Illegal. Liar. Pretender." The boy with the phone, thrilled at the prospect of a clip that might go viral in his private chat, angled for a clearer shot. He sniggered and said in English, "You in trouble now, man?" James looked at him and answered in English, cool as glass, "What you record, you own." The boy blinked, caught off guard by the polish of the sentence, then grinned as if he'd been given permission to keep filming. The tall officer tapped the clipboard with his pen. "Get off at the next stop," he said. "We'll continue this on the platform." James's mouth went dry. "Am I being detained?" The short officer smiled without warmth. "We're asking you to cooperate, that's all." He could refuse. He could raise his voice, insist on an explanation, but he could see the shape of the story as it would be told by others. The tall black foreigner shouting on a train, the officers doing their jobs, the crowd's sympathy racing to the side that looked like order. He loved language because it could reveal truth. He feared it because it could disguise it. "I'll get off," he said, and heard defeat in the politeness. It made his stomach twist. The next station arrived with a shriek that raked his nerves raw. The doors yawned open. Cold air struck his damp sleeve and woke the smell of tea. The officers gestured. Passengers parted, eager for the finale. Someone snickered. "Bye-bye." Another voice, feminine, curdled with contempt, said in Mandarin, "He thought he was important." Important. James stepped onto the platform and found the tiles slick under his soles. A gust of wind shoved through the corridor and made every advertisement flap in place. He shivered. The tall officer handed the passport to the short one and jerked his chin toward a blank stretch of wall. "There," he said. "Stand. Hands on the bag." James obeyed because disobedience felt like a match held to dry leaves. The short officer took a step closer until their noses could have shared a breath. "You know what people like you do?" he asked. The question floated like a trap. James didn't answer. The officer supplied one. "Trouble." He let the word hang, heavy as a verdict, then turned slightly as if to give James a chance to reply and prove him wrong. James's mouth felt full of sand. He could name 100 things he did in this city that were not trouble. He bought oranges from the same vendor every Saturday. He corrected his students gently when they slipped into humiliating self-criticism. He stood in the back of tea shops and listened to the quiet of steeping leaves. He learned the names of the guards at the university gate and greeted them in the morning. None of that would matter here. Stories did not always accumulate to proof. Sometimes they were dismissed as decoration. "Empty your pockets," the tall officer said. James set the satchel down and slid his hands into his coat. Wallet, keys, phone, transit card. He placed them one by one on the satchel in tidy order, the way he taught his students to structure an argument. The short officer ran a finger across the cards as if testing for counterfeit by touch. When he reached the wallet, he flicked it open and peered inside. "How much cash?" "Enough for lunch," James said, and hated that even this sounded like excuse. The short officer smirked. "No drugs?" "No." "No weapons?" "No." "Why so nervous?" "Because you are making me small in front of strangers. Because you are teaching everyone who watches that they can trespass on me. Because I have spent years learning your language and your city, and this morning you are telling me both are irrelevant." James did not say any of that. He said, "Because this is humiliating." The short officer clicked his tongue. "Then don't cause trouble." A small ring of onlookers had followed them onto the platform. They stood at a polite distance. The performance continued, but the stage had widened. A pair of office workers whispered and pointed. A young couple ate steaming buns and watched as if the scene had been arranged for their breakfast. The boy with the phone hovered near the doors, filming through the glass with a theatrical caution that pretended respect for rules. The tall officer held up the passport again, as if the booklet might confess if shaken. "This says you are a professor," he said. "Prove it." "I have an ID card from the university in my bag," James said. "May I take it out?" The tall officer nodded to the short one, who nodded to James, who lifted the satchel flap, careful not to brush the officer's sleeve. He dug for the plastic sleeve and slid out the card. The photo showed him a year younger, less gray in the beard, the university seal gleaming in blue. He held it up. The short officer took it, squinted, and smiled like a man appreciating a clever forgery. "Very official," he said dryly. He handed the card back with 2 fingers, as if the plastic could stain him. "Who will verify this?" "My department chair," James said. "My students." His throat tightened on the last word because the very idea felt dangerous. He did not want them to see him like this. He did not want to drag anyone into this circle of degradation. Yet a stubborn corner of him wanted witnesses who could testify that his life here was not a lie. "Your students?" The short officer chuckled. "Yes, I'm sure they would say nice things." The tall officer looked past James at the train where passengers were boarding for the next run. He seemed impatient, or perhaps bored. "Cuff him," he said. The words fell casual, almost lazy, and froze the air. James's heart thumped once, a hard knock that seemed to echo. "Is that necessary?" he asked. He tried to keep the plea out of his voice and failed. The short officer's mouth twitched like a fishhook snagged on pride. He reached to his belt and pulled the cuffs free. Metal flashed. A woman in the small crowd gasped, the tiny squeak of a spectator who had suddenly realized the stuntman was not wearing a harness. The boy with the phone leaned in so close his breath fogged the glass. "Hands," the short officer said. James looked at his own hands, broad and warm despite the cold, the hands that held chalk and cups and exhausted students' shoulders when they cried about family pressure. He lifted them slowly. A voice behind the officer said softly, "Wait." It was not loud, but it carried. James and the officer both turned. An elderly station attendant in a faded blue coat had edged closer than the crowd. Her eyes were kind and tired. "Maybe call it in," she said to the tall officer. "Check with the university. The morning rush. This will make people late." The short officer flicked annoyance at her. "We are doing our job." She nodded, bobbed, retreated a step, and still did not leave. Her presence, small and stubborn, put a thread of warmth back into James's chest. He held on to it as the short officer took his wrists. Cold metal grazed his skin. The bite of it, even unclosed, made his stomach flip. He tried to anchor himself again in memory. His first lecture here, the door opening at the end of class, and 3 students waiting to thank him in English and Chinese both. Min standing in his office doorway with a notebook pressed to her chest. The security guard at the university gate nodding when James brought him coffee on a night shift. He held those images tight, as if they were talismans that could soften iron. "Hands," the officer said again, impatient. James set his jaw and, because he did not know what else to do that would not make things worse, presented his wrists. The tall officer's radio crackled, a burst of static that sounded like paper tearing. He pressed it to his ear. "Yes," he said. Then again. "Yes." He glanced at James, at the small crowd, at his partner, calculating the public relations math of the moment. He lowered the radio. "Hold," he said to the short officer. The short officer froze, cuffs hovering in a tin halo around James's wrists. "What?" "Hold." The tall officer tucked the radio back on his shoulder and gestured to the passport. "Run it once more." The short officer hesitated and then, annoyed, clicked the cuffs back into their case with a sound that still felt like a closing door. He muttered, "He's playing innocent." But he took the passport and pulled out a phone with a scanner app, aligning the page with mechanical precision. James breathed, barely. The station attendant let out her breath with him. The crowd leaned as one organism. Somewhere on the platform, a baby wailed. The doors of the waiting train closed and the car pulled away, carrying dozens of people who would tell this story at work between sips of bitter office tea. The short officer frowned at the screen. He frowned harder. "It checks," he said grudgingly. The tall officer did not look surprised. He looked relieved he wouldn't have to file the paperwork for a mistake. "Then we will verify another way," he said. His gaze slid to James's satchel, to the folder, to the ID card. "Call someone from the university," he told James. "Now." James's fingers felt clumsy as he picked up his phone. The screen reflected the fluorescent light and his own face, drawn and gray. He scrolled to Min's number and hesitated. He didn't want her to hear his voice like this, squeezed thin by humiliation. but there was no one else who would pick up quickly. His department chair would be in a meeting. He pressed the call. It rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring it clicked, and a young woman's voice said, bright and breathless, "Professor Johnson? We're in the classroom already. Are you nearby? Do you want me to set up the projector?" His throat closed for a second. He swallowed. He made his voice as steady as he could. "Min," he said, "I need a favor." "What happened?" Her voice sharpened in an instant, all the softness replaced by alarm. "Where are you?" "Platform at Yonghaegong," he said. "Railway police stopped me. They're asking for verification." There was a small, stunned silence. "Are you okay?" "I will be," he lied. "Can you come? Bring anyone who is free." She didn't hesitate. "We're coming." The line clicked dead. The word, we warmed him like a coat. He lowered the phone. The short officer smirked. "Calling your friends," he said. "Very good. We will see what they say." He sounded confident that whatever came would fold neatly into the story he preferred. Time stretched, thin and cold. James tried to keep his breathing even. The station attendant remained within sight, a quiet sentinel, not interfering, not abandoning. The small crowd reshuffled but did not disperse. The boy with the phone had moved closer again, the camera tilted to catch both James's face and the officer's bored authority. "Say something," the boy murmured, almost pleading. "Say you're sorry." James glanced at him and said nothing. 10 minutes can be long enough to live an entire other life in your head. James spent them remembering tiny domestic mercies, the way the dumpling vendor tucked an extra into his bag at New Year's, the time a taxi driver tried to refuse his fare and a woman on the curb stepped in, eyes blazing, and told the driver to be ashamed. The afternoon he found a poet's line etched into a bridge railing and traced it with his finger like prayer. He tried to gather those moments to himself, to counterweight the ugliness of this one. For a minute or two, it worked. Then the cold bit deeper, and the short officer began to pace in front of him, and the memory of warmth went thin. Footsteps pounded. The sound, many feet running, reverberated along the platform like a drum roll. Heads turned. The tall officer straightened. The short one squared himself as if for a performance. James lifted his head and saw coats, scarves, backpacks, faces he knew. "Professor," Min's voice, high with breath and fear and fury, leapt ahead of her body. She was small, but she moved like urgency given shape. Behind her came 6 other students, and behind them more, the trickle turning into a stream as word spread through chat groups quicker than any official announcement could travel. They rushed toward him, and the crowd parted, and for the first time that morning James felt the balance of the room tilt in his favor. Min skidded to a stop a few steps from the officers, hands on her thighs as she caught breath. She straightened. Her eyes were wet and bright. She looked at James's wrists, at the cuffs still holstered, at the passport in the officer's hand, and then she lifted her chin. "This is our professor," she said in Mandarin, voice steady and loud. "He teaches us. He belongs here." The short officer rolled his eyes so theatrically it might have been comedy if the stakes were not so cruel. "Stand back," he said. Min didn't move. Her classmates took their places beside her, a line of bodies that gently, unmistakably drew a boundary. One boy raised his student card in his fist like a flag. A girl pulled out her phone, hit record, and aimed it not at James's face, but at the officer's hands. The station air felt charged, heavy with a tension that makes your skin prickle before your mind can explain why. Yonghaegong Station should have been another stop on a winter morning. Now the tiled platform felt like an arena. People pressed in, phones lifted like a ring of tiny eyes, whispers weaving into a chorus of curiosity, judgment, and small cruelties. James stood in the center, tall and walled in by breath and glass and cold. His chest rose and fell too quickly. He had promised himself, coming to Beijing from the United States, that he would meet ignorance with patience, that he would be the teacher he'd needed as a boy, steady, refusing to let other people's fear decide his shape. But patience has limits, and the officers were tugging at them like threads. "You're finished," the shorter officer said, pinching James's sleeve as if claiming ownership. "These kids can scream all they want, but they won't save you." The words hit harder than the grip, because they were aimed at the students clinging to James's sides. His students, his work, his pride, stood pale but stubborn, eyes bright with fear and fury. "Don't touch him!" Min cried. She pushed between James and the officer, small shoulders squared as if bones could be a wall. The officer shoved her with the flat of his hand, a casual cruelty that made nearby faces flinch. She staggered and would have fallen if the boy with glasses hadn't caught her. She set her feet again, breath ragged but voice clear. "He is our teacher." "You call this law?" the boy asked, anger cracking his voice. "You humiliate a teacher in front of everyone? Is this justice?" Murmurs rippled. "Too much," a woman whispered. "Don't interfere," another warned. A man in a paint-stained jacket shook his head like someone watching a wrong that rubbed his skin raw. But there were laughs, too, thin, sharp, eager. James looked at Min, at the boy, at the others, bracing their backs against the tide of bodies. Pride rose in him like heat. They were barely older than children, and they were choosing to stand. He filled his lungs and let his spine lock into place. When he spoke, his voice came out low and resonant. "Enough." The word rang off tile and steel. "You will not touch my students. You will not treat me like dirt." For a heartbeat, the platform stilled. Even the taller officer blinked, surprised by the weight in the tone. Then the pause broke. Laughter burst at the edges. A few teenagers bending in parody bows, a chant in broken English, sing-song and cruel. "Teacher, teach me, doll. Teacher, teach me!" They mimicked his baritone, puffed their chests, slapped each other with delight. Someone shouted in Mandarin, "Teach us how to lie, Professor!" Another called, "He thinks he's one of us!" The idea that he could belong was the joke. Heat rushed beneath James's skin. Chicago anger rose like tide, flashing lights in a rearview mirror, hands on a hood, being told to stop explaining. He had learned anger could be a truth-teller and a trap. He shut his eyes for a breath and opened them again. He did not look at the officers. He looked at his students. "Language matters," he said in Mandarin, laying each syllable like stones across a river. "The words you throw, ghost, thief, liar, tell you nothing about me. They tell me about you. Every insult is a mirror." The laughter thinned, a few phones tilted down. The boy with the loudest mouth suddenly found his sneaker interesting. "I am a professor," James continued. "I teach language. I teach respect. Right now we're seeing what happens when people forget respect. I will not forget it." A hush folded over the near circle. For a moment, the platform tilted toward decency. The short officer slapped the passport against James's chest. "Fine words," he said. "Words won't save you." "You're coming with us!" The taller officer's radio crackled, static like paper tearing, followed by a clipped voice. "Yong Hegong, report! Complaints incoming from platform video! What is happening?" The tall man's eyes flicked to the ring of phones. He didn't answer. The short one yanked James's forearm. James lurched forward, his satchel sliding. The students cried out and grabbed for him. The platform erupted, the officer pulling one way, students the other. James pulled between them like a rope. "Don't touch him!" Min yelled. The officer knocked her aside with an elbow. She hit the tile on her knees. The boy with glasses hauled her up, eyes blazing. "You hurt her!" he shouted. "Is this your justice?" The satchel slipped and spilled, papers fanning, attendance sheets, drafts, a booklet of poem translations marked with careful notes. An apple rolled and stopped against a boot. The short officer towed the papers, smearing a footprint. "Contraband," he said, and a few people laughed. His partner held up the university ID with 2 fingers as if fished from a drain. "Johnson, Professor," he read, and looked from plastic to man as if the difference itself proved deceit. Maybe fake. "It's not," Min said, her voice trembling but iron underneath. "Ask any of us." She lifted her student card. The boy with glasses did the same. One by one, others raised theirs until a ring of photos and names shone under the lights. "Student theater," a man in a leather jacket muttered, "not quite soft enough." The older worker edged closer. "If he has papers, let him go," he said, blunt and honest as his hands. "You make a show because of his skin. That is wrong." "Mind your business," the short officer snapped. He set his heel on the stack of poems and ground down. "Hands on the wall," he told James. "Pat down, now." James stared at the heel print on the page he'd translated in a quiet kitchen. He forced his gaze up and turned to the wall. Cold tile kissed his palms. He spread his feet because that's how life taught him to stand when shame wanted a script. The officer's hands moved fast, impersonal, digging into pockets with little jerks that were more insult than search. Wallet, phone, transit card. Each item clattered onto the satchel. The partner fished the pen from James's breast pocket and held it up. "Weapon," he said, earning a brittle laugh. A boy in a puffy coat watched and asked his mother too loudly, "Mama, why do they hate him?" She hushed him and tugged him close, her eyes flicking to James with an apology she couldn't speak. The short officer pushed at the back of James's knees. "Down! Kneel!" James's body remembered rooms where kneeling was humiliation disguised as procedure. He straightened. "No," he said, not loud but unbreakable. "I will stand." The officer pressed a hand to the back of his neck, enough to bend him. Gasps scattered like birds. James's knees touched cold for a heartbeat. He pushed back upright. "I will not kneel for your contempt." "You think you're brave?" the officer sneered. He tapped James's cheek twice with 2 fingers, a gesture dressed as attention and designed to sting. "Apologize," he said. "Look at the camera and apologize for causing trouble." He gestured to a teenager with a phone. The boy brightened, already writing a caption in his head. James looked at the lens, black as a well. He turned toward his students. "No," he said. "Then this gets rough," the officer said. "Let him go," a woman called. "He didn't do anything." Another voice answered, "Foreigners always think they're special." And an argument caught fire 3 paces away, strangers squaring off about a man none of them knew. Water flicked against James's sleeve. A boy capped his bottle with a smirk. "Clean up," he said. "Dirty." Min gasped. The older worker snapped, "Enough, kid," and the boy suddenly looked small. "Back office," the tall officer said to his partner. "Move him. Now." "Try," the short officer answered, grabbing for James's wrist. The cuffs flashed like hungry moons. The students closed ranks. They formed a ring around James so quickly it looked rehearsed. Min stepped to his side, palm on his sleeve. The boy with glasses planted himself in front of the officer and raised his student card like a badge. "If you take him," he said, "you take us." "Then we take you," the officer said, delighted. He reached for the boy's shoulder. James moved without thinking, pivoting to block him. "No," he said. The word was a wall. "Out of the way," the officer snapped. "All of you." "Sir," the tall one said sharply. He had his radio to his ear again. "Supervisors are on their way," he murmured, "and video is live." "Let them come," the short one said, but his eyes flicked to the staircase, to the new sound rolling down it like distant surf. Feet. Many feet. The first wave of students hit the bottom step with cheeks flushed from running. They didn't shout. They lifted their student IDs as they walked in. Some James knew, others he recognized by the way they took notes like catching rain. Their presence was a sound in itself. The crowd swayed. Some edged back to make room. A man grumbled about being late and then didn't move. "Who called you?" the officer demanded. "We did," Min said. "All of us." The boy with glasses had his phone out, a live stream comment feed sprinting by. "That's our professor. I'm coming. Don't let them take him." Emojis flashed like flares. "Put the phone away," the officer said. "No," the boy said, shocking himself. His lower lip trembled and then steadied. "No!" A girl in a long coat pushed through, tears coming when she saw the stepped-on papers. She crouched and gathered them, smoothing pages against her knee. "You worked on these all night," she whispered, as if the memory were proof. "Leave it," the short officer ordered. "Pick them up," the tall one said at the same time, trying to borrow decency from the air. The girl handed the stack to James with care. "Hands," the short officer said, lifting the cuffs. Phones rose. The crowd was a weather system, gathering charge. "Hold," the tall officer said quickly. "Command says wait." The short one acted like he hadn't heard. He reached for James's wrists. James didn't pull back. He felt his pulse in his throat. He thought of his mother's kitchen, the fan ticking, his father's hands teaching him to tie a tie, every student who had trusted him with a fragile question. "Hands," the officer repeated. A young man in a hoodie slid between them so suddenly the officer cursed. "He is our professor," the young man said, voice shaking but strong. He spoke not like a hero but like someone remembering who he was. More students stepped into the small spaces left by fear until there were not many spaces left at all. The ring tightened. "Move!" the officer barked. He shoved one kid. Another held his ground. Fabric tore. The speakers pinged, and a new voice flooded the station. "Attention passengers, due to an incident on the platform, trains will be delayed. Please remain calm and make way for staff." The announcement worked like a solvent on patience. "We're going to be late," someone snapped. "This is because of him," another said, pointing at James like accusation could move time. "No!" Min shouted back, surprising herself with the force in her throat. "This is because of them!" She pointed at the officers, and something in her certainty made several heads nod. The older worker crossed his arms. "I'm not leaving," he said. A mother pulled her child closer and whispered, "Watch. This matters." The boy looked from officer to students and nodded solemnly. "Last time," the short officer said, gathering himself for a lunge. His face was flushed high on the cheeks. He lifted the cuffs. "Hands." James inhaled. He did not raise his hands. He did not drop them. He could feel Min's palm at his elbow, steady as a metronome. On the staircase, the thunder of feet swelled again, and a new wave of students poured down, dozens, then more than dozens, winter coats flapping, eyes bright with fear, and something like love. They didn't shout slogans. They simply moved as one, and as they reached the bottom step, they lifted their cards and their phones and their voices together, less chant than declaration. "He is our professor." The words rolled, then rose, filling the station like a tide, and the short officer froze with the cuffs hanging in the air, metal catching the fluorescent light as the circle closed and held. The cuffs hung in the air, catching fluorescent light, and the sound that rose wasn't shouting but breath, one long collective inhale. Then the words, low at first and growing, rolled along the platform. "He is our professor," and the metal lost its shine. James felt the tremor in the bodies pressed to his sleeves, the warmth of his students' coats against the cold of his own. Min's palm held his elbow. The boy with glasses planted his feet like an anchor. Phones hovered. "Enough," the taller officer said to his partner. He touched his radio. "Command says hold. Do not engage until supervisor arrives." The shorter officer's jaw worked. The cuffs clicked back into their case with a sound that still felt like a threat. "Everyone back!" he barked, and his voice slid off the crowd. A woman in a station uniform hustled toward them. The older attendant who had lingered earlier came with her. Behind them, a man in a navy wool coat moved with the grave impatience of authority. "Captain," the tall officer said, straightening. The man in the wool coat took in the ring of students, the two officers, the papers stamped with shoe prints, the phones, the open satchel, Min's trembling, then steadiness. "Who is in charge?" he asked. And when both officers started to speak, he cut them with a palm. "Not now, ID." James handed him his passport and permit. The captain checked stamps, then looked at the plastic university card the tall officer held like a swallowed apology. "You are Professor Johnson?" "Yes," James said. The captain nodded. "From the university." He turned to the students. "You vouch for him?" "He teaches us," Min said, "every week." "And by the university?" A voice came from the stairs. "Professor Johnson!" And a man in a dark overcoat pushed through, an assistant behind. "Liu Jian, Vice Dean," he said to the captain. He produced a letter with the university seal. "This is our faculty member." The captain skimmed the paper. Phones rose. A few teenagers at the edge dropped their eyes. "Captain," the tall officer murmured. "There were complaints." "I can imagine." The captain looked at James. "Were you asked for your documents on the train?" "Yes." "Did you refuse?" "No." "And here?" He gestured to the damp prints of Min's knees and the scattered pages. "Did you resist?" "I stood," James said. "I asked that my students not be touched." The captain's posture loosened. He turned to the short officer. "We don't do crowd control by humiliation." The short officer began. "I am speaking," the captain said. "We will address use of force in my office." He looked to the students. "Step back half a meter. No one is taking your teacher. You have made your point." Min exhaled and took one careful step back while keeping her palm on James's sleeve. The others followed, half a meter, no more. The captain nodded to the station manager. "Open a room. Warm." To James, "We can speak privately there if you wish." James looked at the faces that had held him up. Students, the worker with paint on his sleeves, the attendant who had not left. "With respect, I would like to say something here," he said. The captain considered the phones and the blinking delay board. "1 minute," he said. James stepped forward enough that his voice would carry. "I was stopped because I am visible," he said in Mandarin. "Then I was made small because some believe a visible man can be pushed into invisibility. That is what humiliation is, a way to erase." He lifted his hand, palm open. "Speech is the sound of the heart. Yan Wei Xin Sheng. What we say reveals what we are. Today, many hearts were loud. The students who stood here did not insult. They did not hit. They said only what was true. I am their teacher. They made room for me when there was no room. Respect given is respect returned. I am not angry that I was asked for my documents. I am angry that my dignity became entertainment. If you filmed me, you own a piece of this morning. Use it to tell the truth, not the story that hurts because it is easy. And if you laughed, you can still choose who you are when you go upstairs. I will ride this train again. I will teach these students to hear the music in words. Respect is a language too. We can choose to speak it." He stopped. The minute felt full. A hand lifted from the ring of teenagers. The boy who had mocked loudest cleared his throat. "Professor, I shouldn't have said those things. The apology came out blunt, but it came. His friend looked away, ears red. The captain inclined his head. Thank you. To the short officer. Holster. Step back. To the tall officer. Help gather the professor's things. The tall man bent at once, picked up the apple, wiped it on his sleeve, set it in the satchel like returning a small honor. Room 3, the station manager said, pointing. Hot water. She looked at James. Tea? Yes, James said. Thank you. They walked as a group, the captain, the station manager, the tall officer with the satchel, James with Min and 3 older students. The crowd loosened. Some left now that the fight was gone. Others stayed to see if the ending could repair the beginning. The room was small, white-walled. The heater ticked. A kettle hissed. The station manager poured paper cups and pushed sugar across. James wrapped his hands around the cup and felt sensation return to his fingers. I need to take statements, the captain said. Yours, the officers, some passengers. He looked at Min. 1 student representative. I'll speak, Min said, surprising herself. Sir? He nodded. Voluntary. Necessary, she answered. Vice Dean Liu stepped in. Professor, he said, softer. Are you hurt? I'm angry, James said, and tired. Then we will do 2 things, Liu said. Tell the truth cleanly, and go back to class. To the captain, we will file a letter regarding conduct on the platform. The captain inclined his head. I will file my own. He glanced toward the door, where the short officer stood outside, chin tilted. There will be internal review. James sipped the tea. It tasted of metal and heat. He watched Min rub her knees under the table. He watched the boy with glasses wipe his frames and put them back on. James answered questions. Min gave a clean sequence. The tall officer described the checking of documents, the crowd, the moment balance went wrong. The short officer spoke last, voice tight, insisting on procedure, skipping over tone. The captain closed his notebook. You can file complaints, he said. The station will issue a statement about procedure. I don't want to press war, James said. I want my students not to be punished. They will not be, the vice dean said before the captain could. If punishment is handed out today, it will not fall on those who held a line. He turned to Min. Take your classmates to campus. Wait for me there. To James, walk with me. They stepped back into the station. Morning resumed. Delays blinked into green. The older attendant stood near the stairs, hands folded, eyes soft when they found James. He touched his hand to his heart, and she nodded. On the escalator, Min stood 1 step ahead. Professor, she said, I was scared. Me too, he said. Outside, the air cut clean. They walked under street trees that had let go of their leaves. Students caught up and fell in around them, making a row that felt intentional. In the lecture hall, the heat ran too high. A projector hummed. Min connected the cable with hands that still shook. The boy with glasses opened the blinds. The vice dean sat near the back. The room filled with faces drawn not by syllabus, but by story. James set his satchel on the desk, took out the streaked sheaf of poems, and laid them flat. I don't have slides, he said. I've had a morning. Small, kind laughter moved through the tears. So I will say this instead. What we say is who we are. He wrote on the board. Yan Wei Xin Sheng. He sounded it out. Speech is the sound of the heart. He underlined the last character. We study language because we believe people can mean better than they did yesterday. He recited a poem, lines about winter and walking home. Now it was about a station and a circle and a choice. He read it in Chinese and then in English, the versions braided by pauses. The room held still. He let the last line sit. Hands went up with ordinary human wanting. Are you okay? What will happen to the officer? What should we do when we see this again? James said he was okay enough. He said he did not know about the officer and that the not knowing was its own test. He said when they saw this again, they should measure their bravery against their safety and then move a little farther than the measurement told them to, because that is how lines shift. When class ended, students lined up not to shake his hand but to touch his sleeve, to leave words like offerings. Professor, I recorded, but I won't post without permission. My little brother saw the stream. He says you're like the teachers in dramas. My mother cried and said to eat hot soup. He answered as his mother taught him. The vice dean walked with him to the door. You were right to speak on the platform, Liu said. Sometimes private apologies teach nothing. He hesitated. I should have come faster. You came, James said, and you said I'm your faculty member where people could hear it. That matters. On the steps, the boy who had mocked approached alone, hat in his hands like a confession. Professor, he said, blinking. I was mean. I'm sorry. You were loud, James said evenly. Being loud is easy. Being better takes practice. He held the boy's gaze and then let him go. That evening, when the city softened with neon and soup steam, James rode the same line home. A man gave up a seat without looking to see to whom. A woman nodded as if they had met at a party rather than on a platform. He stood near the door watching his reflection slide across the window. A station attendant at a later stop met his eye and gave the smallest salute. At home, he warmed leftover rice and soup. He ate standing at the counter. He rinsed the bowl and leaned against the sink. The day washed through him. Cold tile, bright lights, a boot print, a child's solemn nod. He allowed himself a few tears and did not feel they unmade him. When they were done, he stood straighter. His phone buzzed, messages stacked. The vice dean confirming the university's statement of support, the captain noting that internal review had begun, the older station attendant sending nothing but the emoji of a cup of tea. Min's text was a photo of the board. Yan Wei Xin Sheng, in his handwriting. Under it, she had typed, "We heard you." The next morning, he put on the same coat because some kinds of stubbornness are recovery. He tucked a new apple into the satchel. On the platform, a boy stood with his mother, stared, then raised a mittened hand. James raised his in return. When the doors opened, he stepped in and felt the usual sway. There was the ad for cram school and the poster with a porcelain cup pouring steam. There was his reflection, tired, older than yesterday, made of the same materials that had carried him. Eyes lifted and dropped in the ordinary inventory. Strangers make of one another. No one raised a phone. A woman in a red scarf smiled. At the next stop, a student he barely knew stumbled in, saw him, and hesitated. Professor Johnson? She asked. He nodded. She glanced at the people near them and said in careful English, My father told me to tell you that respect is a language too. He smiled, not at the grammar, but at the way a message had traveled across a day to reach this car. Tell your father he's right, he said in Mandarin. She grinned and found space. The city slid by. The train ran on time. Somewhere down the line, Yonghegong's tiles kept their cold. Somewhere, 2 men wrote reports. Somewhere, a circle of students remembered the shape of their bodies when they decided enough was enough and learned that the word we is heavier than handcuffs. If you stayed through this and felt anything move, carry that with you. Say something kind where a crowd is cruel. Make room when someone is being pushed smaller. Tell me what you saw in this story and what it asks of you in your own life. And if you want more stories like this, about people finding a way through, stay with us. There are more to tell.